I was in 6th grade at Columbia Grammar School in New York, one of the oldest schools in the country. I've been there since kindergarten and had pretty much become friendly with everyone in my grade. Everyone except one person who made me question why I'd ever come to that school in the first place. His name was Jack. He was new that year. At first he seemed polite and well-mannered, the kind of kid teachers instantly liked. But first impressions can be misleading. He started sitting next to me in every class. At lunch, he always chose my table. I wasn't sure if he liked me or just really wanted to be my friend, but I didn't overthink it. Eventually, he asked for my number. I gave it to him, assuming he wouldn't be weird over text. At first, he wasn't. We talked about homework, teachers, and random news. The texts and calls felt normal until one day he asked me out. I can't say I was surprised. I'd been waiting for it. I just didn't know when it would happen. I wasn't offended, but I didn't feel that way about him, so I politely said no. He hung up immediately. I hoped I hadn't hurt his feelings too badly, but everyone handles rejection differently. I texted him, "I'm sorry, Jack, I just don't like you like that." He never answered the whole night. The next day at school, I tried to talk to him, hoping to clear the air. He ignored me and walked away. All day he dodged me, turning down other hallways, switching seats, avoiding my table at lunch. I figured I'd really embarrassed him, but I wasn't going to change my answer just to make him feel better. That afternoon, I rode home on the school bus. When we pulled up to my stop, I looked out the window and saw Jack standing outside on the sidewalk, staring straight at me with a furious expression. Right then, I decided I was done trying to fix things. If he wanted to be angry, that was his problem. I'd wait for an apology and for him to show he could move on. The next morning, one of my teachers told me the headmaster wanted to see me. I was confused and a little scared. I couldn't think of anything I'd done wrong. I went to the office and sat down when he asked me to. "Am I in trouble?" I asked. "I've been informed," he said, "that you've been cyberbullying Alex and Jason." Alex and Jason were 2 boys in my grade. My mind blanked. I immediately insisted I hadn't done anything of the sort. He said he had proof, then pulled out a sheet of paper. It was a printout of text messages, vicious messages, sent from a number that looked like mine, harassing Alex and Jason. I felt like the floor fell out from under me. "This is photoshopped," I told him. "I didn't write those." He stared at me for a moment, then said, "You have 24 hours to prove this is fake. If you can't, you'll be suspended for 2 weeks. I snapped a photo of the printout, left his office, and tried not to panic. At lunch, I went straight to Alex and Jason, who happened to be sitting together. I dragged them aside. They looked confused and annoyed. "Jack spread a rumor that I've been bullying you too," I said. They both frowned. They had no idea what I was talking about. I showed them the picture on my phone. As they read the messages, their faces shifted from confusion to shock. "Why would he do something like that to you?" Jason asked. "What did you do to him?" "I didn't do anything," I said quietly. "He asked me out," I said no nicely, "and I guess he didn't like that." Even saying it out loud made me feel sick and embarrassed. Alex straightened. "We need to go to the office. Now." The 3 of us went to the headmaster. Alex and Jason told him I wasn't bullying them and showed him their actual text history with me, normal conversations, no harassment. The headmaster compared everything and quickly realized something was off. He apologized to me for doubting me and said I was cleared of any wrongdoing. Later that night, I got an email from the assistant principal. Jack had been suspended for a week for spreading false information about me. I was relieved. At least I wouldn't have to see him at school for a little while or face everyone thinking I'd done something awful. I hoped the time away would make him realize how far he'd gone and that he'd come back more mature, maybe even apologize. That wasn't what happened. Over the weekend, I was walking home from dance class, alone on my block and scrolling through my phone when someone shouted, "Hey!" I turned and my heart dropped. "Jack," I froze. My school was in uptown Manhattan. I lived downtown. Our school didn't hand out family directories with addresses. There was no normal way he should have known where I lived. I took a few steps back, my stomach twisting. "How did you even find me?" I asked. Instead of answering, he snapped, "So you're just not going to go out with me? I've been planning this ever since I met you, and this is how you treat me." I wanted to scream, but I kept my voice steady because I didn't want to cause a scene on the street. "I wasn't mean to you," I said. "You overreacted when I said no, you lied and almost got me suspended, and now you're stalking me when I never told you where I live. You've gone too far." He kept yelling, calling me a dick, saying I'd mistreated him, none of which was true. Then he raised his fists like he was about to hit me. I started screaming for help and ran. He chased me down the block. I didn't look back. When I reached my building and the doorman came into view, Jack stopped, turned, and ran the other way. He must have realized he'd be recognized or reported. I stumbled into the lobby, shaking. The doorman asked who that kid was. I told him Jack went to my school and had followed me home. "Do I need to call the police?" he asked. I told him no, that I'd handle it, and took the elevator up. My parents were at the dinner table when I burst into the apartment. They took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. I told them everything, about the lies, the suspension, and now this. My parents were furious and terrified. My mom said she would email the headmaster immediately. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining Jack lurking outside my building, waiting for me. On Monday, before classes even began, I was called into the headmaster's office again. This time, it was good news. Jack had been expelled. I felt like I could finally breathe. He wouldn't be at school, wouldn't be in my neighborhood, at least not because of me, and wouldn't be able to corner or harass me again. The rest of middle school went by in a blur after that. I never had another stalker situation, and I hope I never do. If you're about to start middle school, choose carefully who you let close. One wrong person can drag you into something you never saw coming, and it could be worse than what I went through. When I was 37, I decided to go to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport, rented a car, and started the 35-minute drive back to my hometown. The route cut through a lonely stretch of countryside, empty fields, quiet woods, and long, straight roads that felt abandoned. It was broad daylight, but something about the emptiness was unsettling. About 3 miles outside of town, I saw someone on the shoulder of the road flagging me down. I slowed, ready to roll past, then recognized him. Jim. We'd been friends in high school but hadn't seen each other in 20 years. Aside from a few more lines on his face, he looked basically the same. He climbed into the passenger seat and we started talking. We joked about old pranks, teachers we couldn't stand, and who'd married whom. It felt good to see a familiar face before walking into a room full of people I hadn't seen in decades. As we approached town, I asked, "You coming to the VFW for a drink before the reunion?" "No, just take me home," he said. I remembered where his parents used to live, a few blocks from my grandmother's old place, so I started to head that way. "No," he said again. "Take me to the outskirts of town." There was a mobile home park out there. I figured that's where he lived now, so I didn't question it. When we reached the turnoff, he said, "Just drop me here. It was good to see you." He got out and walked off into the darkening evening. I turned the car around and headed to the VFW. By the time I walked in, a bunch of classmates were already there, drinks in hand. We talked about who we'd seen around town, who was definitely coming, and who probably wouldn't show. At some point, I casually mentioned, I actually just picked Jim up 3 miles east of town and dropped him off on the edge of the trailer park. The room went dead silent. Even the guy doing karaoke put the microphone down. My cousin, sitting next to me, went pale. Barba Jim died on that curve 8 years ago, rolled his car. We were all at his funeral. I felt lightheaded. For a second I thought they were messing with me, but nobody was laughing. I muttered something about needing air and stumbled outside. I slid into the driver's seat, hands shaking, trying to convince myself there was some kind of mistake. That's when I noticed the folded newspaper on the passenger seat. It was old and yellowed, our town's local paper dated 8 years earlier. On the front page was Jim's obituary. I unfolded it, heart pounding. The article confirmed what my classmates had said. Jim had died in a car accident on that curve outside of town. He'd lost control, rolled into a ditch, and died on impact. I had just driven that exact stretch. I had just given him a ride. My brain scrambled for a rational explanation. Had someone left the paper in my car as a prank? Had I somehow misrecognized a stranger? None of it made sense. The next day, I drove to his parents' house. I debated turning back twice but forced myself to knock. Jim's mother answered. Grief had carved itself into her face over the years. I introduced myself and told her who I was. When I mentioned seeing Jim, her eyes widened. She invited me in and had me sit. I told her exactly what had happened, that I'd picked him up outside of town, talked to him like old times, and dropped him near the mobile home park. Tears welled in her eyes. She told me that, ever since Jim died, people in town had occasionally reported seeing him, usually near the spot where he crashed, sometimes walking, sometimes standing on the side of the road. A few people even swore they'd given him rides. Some chalked it up to stress and imagination. Others whispered that it was his spirit, stuck between here and wherever he was supposed to go. I asked her if she'd ever noticed anything herself. She nodded. Sometimes she'd hear his favorite song on the radio, but the radio wouldn't be on. Sometimes she felt him near in the hallways in his old room. He's never really left, she said quietly. I like to think he's watching over us. I left feeling heavy and strangely hollow. That night in my motel, I barely slept. I kept replaying the moment I saw him on the side of the road, the way he laughed in the car, and the weight of that newspaper in my hands. When the reunion ended a few days later, I drove back toward the highway. As I approached the curve, I slowed and looked at the shoulder. There was no one there. I still have that old newspaper with Jim's obituary. I keep it folded in a drawer, a reminder of that night. Whenever I take it out, I feel the same chill. Maybe the past isn't as far behind us as we think. Maybe some goodbyes take longer than others. Before the next story, the narrator on the channel dropped in a brief reminder. If you were new, you should subscribe and turn on notifications to catch future scary stories, and share them if you enjoyed them. Then the next memory began. I was in grade school, around 9 or 10, when this happened. My house was 3 or 4 miles from the school. Most days I either walked home or took the bus. Our playground was big, surrounded on one side by a long metal fence that separated it from the street. Cars often parked along that fence, teachers' cars, neighbors, random visitors, nothing unusual. One afternoon at recess, I was tossing a ball with 1 or 2 friends while other kids took turns jumping in. We were laughing and not paying much attention to anything else. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a man standing on the other side of the fence. He looked about 70, maybe older, with messy gray hair. He wore a black suit, nice, formal, the kind you'd wear to a wedding or funeral. That alone made him stand out among the parked cars and casual clothes. He paced back and forth in a short line, maybe 10 feet each way, never straying too far from an old hatchback parked on the street. He never looked directly at me, but I had this strong sense he was watching the kids. Because he didn't say anything or try to come closer, I told myself I was overreacting. I went back to my game, though I checked on him a few times. Each time he was still there, walking that same short path. Eventually recess ended. I forgot about him as the day went on. Later that evening, my parents were getting ready to go out. My mom asked me to grab an umbrella from the car since the sky was getting dark. Our house sat on a small hill with a rock wall around the front and a driveway up the side. I ran to the car, grabbed the umbrella, shut the door, and turned to go back. He was there again. Same old hatchback, same black suit, same gray hair. He was parked just beyond our house, pacing along the sidewalk in front of our block 10, 15 feet in one direction, then back. My heart plummeted. What were the odds? I ducked down behind the car door in the rock wall, gripping the umbrella. Back then we didn't have cell phones, and I was afraid to shout, afraid he'd notice exactly where I was. I didn't even know if my parents would hear me from inside. Thunder rumbled overhead and a light rain started. I peeked out. He kept pacing, scanning the street in a slow, deliberate way, like he was looking for something or someone. It felt like forever, crouched there in the damp air. Finally, I decided I had to run for the door. My parents would start wondering where I'd gone. I waited until his back was turned, then bolted up the hill. I burst into the house, slammed the door, and called for my parents, shaking. I told them about the man at recess and now outside our house. My dad went outside to look while my mom asked questions. By the time my parents reached the street, the man and the hatchback were gone. They tried to calm me down. Maybe he was just a parent picking up a kid from somewhere nearby. Maybe he was a neighbor out for a walk. But I kept insisting something was off. The suit, the pacing, the way he never seemed to look at anyone yet felt like he was watching me. My dad said if we saw the car again, we'd write down the plate and call the police. Until then, there wasn't much we could do. For the next few days, I was on edge. At recess, I stayed near teachers. I kept glancing at the fence. He never showed up. I slowly relaxed. Maybe it had been a strange coincidence. Maybe he'd been a distant grandparent visiting someone. Then one afternoon, I walked home from the bus stop alone. Most of my friends were staying after school. The sky was cloudy, making the streets feel darker and emptier than usual. As I turned onto my block, my stomach tightened. The old hatchback was parked at the corner. I slowed and squinted but couldn't see anyone inside. For a second I told myself I was imagining it, but as I got closer, I knew it was the same car. I was too scared to walk past it on that side of the street. I crossed over to the other sidewalk and tried to move quietly. Just as I was about to pass it, I heard a faint squeak from inside, like someone shifting in the driver's seat. I didn't look. I didn't want to see his face or confirm he'd been watching me. I ran. I sprinted down the block, up my driveway, and didn't turn around until I reached my front steps. The hatchback was still there at the corner, but I saw no one. He could have been hunched down, or maybe I just lost my mind with fear. That night, my parents took me more seriously. My dad said if we saw the car again, we'd call the police immediately. We watched from the windows for a while, but the car never came back. I barely slept. Every little sound made me think of tires in the street or someone walking past the house. The next day, and the days after that, I watched the fence at school and the streets on the way home. The man never appeared again. The hatchback vanished from my life as suddenly as it had arrived. I eventually moved on to middle school. The memory of the man in the black suit and that old car faded into something I only shared with close friends when the conversation turned to creepy childhood stories. Even now, when I pass a boarded-up house or an empty street corner, I sometimes feel that same sinking feeling in my stomach. And I still wonder who he was and what he wanted. Back in 2007, I booked a house through this new site called Airbnb. It wasn't nearly as big or polished as it is now. It felt more like rolling the dice than making a reservation. I hated hotels too crowded, too loud, so I thought renting a small house would be better. I wanted a quiet week with my daughter Ellie, who was 6 at the time, all energy and questions. A place with some space would be perfect. The listing was simple: charming 2-bedroom farmhouse, peaceful, private, perfect for families. The photos showed an old house with a wraparound porch, trees all around, and a swing hanging from a big branch in the front yard. It looked ideal. When we pulled up, it was even prettier than the pictures. The place had that faded, old movie charm. Ellie ran straight to the swing, shrieking with laughter as she pumped her legs. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and dust. The furniture was worn but solid. Faded floral wallpaper covered the walls. It wasn't modern, but it felt like a real home. I unpacked while Ellie explored, calling out every little discovery. That first night, I made spaghetti. We sat at the small kitchen table. Ellie was quieter than usual, pushing her food around. "Everything okay?" I asked. She shrugged. "I saw a lady," she said suddenly. "Outside?" I asked. "No, inside," she frowned. "Upstairs, looking out the window." She waved at me. I don't really believe in ghosts. I figured she'd seen her reflection or a shadow, and her imagination had done the rest. "Well, it was probably just a shadow," I said lightly. "Nothing to worry about." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded and went back to eating. The second night, things got stranger. I was half asleep in my room when I heard Ellie talking down the hall. At first, I thought she was dreaming, but her voice stayed steady, like a conversation. I got up and walked to her room. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, feet swinging, staring at the far corner of the room. "Ellie," I said, trying to sound calm. "Who are you talking to?" She turned to me, eyes wide but not scared. "The lady," she said. "She's sad." My mouth went dry. "What lady?" "The one who lives here," Ellie said. "She says her name is Mrs. Hale. She misses her garden." The name hit me like a slap. That wasn't some generic ghost name a 6-year-old would come up with. My brain scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe Ellie had seen the name written somewhere. "What else did she say?" I asked carefully. Ellie's face fell. "She said her husband hurt her really bad, and now she can't leave." The next morning, after Ellie woke up, I went looking. In the living room, I found a dusty bookshelf holding a few local history books. I flipped through until one entry stopped me. Margaret Hale, beloved gardener and community member, 1935-1997. There was a black and white photo of a woman smiling in front of a huge flower bed. My stomach twisted. I spent the whole day trying to distract Ellie, taking her to a park, out for ice cream, anywhere but that house. By late afternoon, she was fidgety. "She's waiting for me," Ellie said matter-of-factly as the sun started to sink. "No, she's not," I snapped, sharper than I meant to. "There's no one here but us." Ellie just looked at me like she knew something I didn't. That night, I barely slept. Every creak felt magnified. Around 3 a.m., I heard slow, soft footsteps in the hallway. "Ellie," I called, voice shaking. No answer. I opened my door. The hallway was empty, but Ellie's door was open. I rushed in. She was standing at the window, looking out into the dark yard. "What are you doing?" I whispered, grabbing her shoulders. "She's outside now," Ellie said, pointing. I looked. The yard was empty. The swing creaked softly in the wind. "We're leaving tomorrow," I said. "First thing in the morning." Ellie didn't argue. I didn't wait. By 5 a.m. we were packed and in the car, driving away as the sky lightened. Ellie stared out the window, unusually quiet. When we got home, something nagged at me. The name, the garden, the husband part. I called the local police department for the town where we'd stayed and asked if they had any records about a woman named Margaret Hale. At first they were cagey. When I pressed, mentioning the farmhouse and Margaret's name, the officer on the line went quiet for a long moment. "Her death was ruled an accident," he finally said. "Fell down the stairs. But there were rumors. Some people thought her husband might have been involved. Nothing was ever proven." That was enough for me. A week later, the same officer called back. His voice was different this time, tighter, serious. "We reopened the case," he said. "Found blood evidence under the stairs. Some of Margaret's personal belongings were buried in the garden. Things that shouldn't have been buried. Her husband had confessed after a long interrogation. Years have passed. Ellie barely remembers that trip, and I've never brought it up. I still don't believe every bump in the night is a ghost. But whenever I think about that farmhouse, and the way my daughter described Mrs. Hale, I'm not sure what I believe anymore. I remember clocking in on a blazing Saturday in early June, strangely excited. It was only my second day back at the grocery store after being away for a while, but I already knew the ropes. I'd worked there about 1.5 years during the pandemic. Nothing from that time compares to what happened that day. I grew up in a rough suburb of the Bay Area, the kind of place where people either scraped by paycheck to paycheck or drifted into crime. My parents taught me to stay alert and assume the worst so I'd be ready if it ever happened. I didn't realize how soon I'd need that mindset. We were a small crew, only about 26 employees total, and after 6 p.m. maybe 5 of us on duty. By around 3:30, the store was still busy. A woman came in with 3 little boys and a small dog. She had a dog carrier, and one of the kids was holding the dog. One manager, Sam, didn't want the dog near food because of health codes, so he put the dog and the boy in our office and closed the door. 5 minutes later, I heard our intercom code that signaled theft in progress. We all snapped to attention. I glanced around the aisles. Sam, who also had long hair like me, walked out of the back with a hard look on his face. Moments later, the family came through my line. One boy now held the dog, and another didn't have the carrier anymore. Manager Jay, the owner's daughter, jumped on the register behind me, which made me suspicious. Then I heard shouting outside, a kid's voice, high and panicked. In a flash, Sam stormed back in holding the dog carrier. He slammed it onto a nearby register and unzipped it. Inside were bottles of lotion, rubbing alcohol, random medications, stuff from aisle 1, things you'd use to cook up drugs or clean paraphernalia. My brain clicked. The mom had filled the bag with stolen items and told her kid to run out with it, knowing we wouldn't want to chase a child with a dog. The mother started screaming at Jay and Sam, swearing they'd hit her kid. Supervisor Marlin rushed over after watching the cameras. She'd seen everything. The yelling spilled into the parking lot. Outside, I heard the boy claiming Sam had struck him, which wasn't true. Marlin shouted back that she was calling the cops and Child Protective Services. She told the woman she'd seen her load the bag and tell her son to bolt. Eventually, the family left in a storm of insults. Once things settled, I peeked into the bag. It was definitely a makeshift drug kit. The idea of those kids living in that mess made me sick. I planned to talk to Jay about it after work, since she was the owner's daughter and I trusted her. But as the shift went on, normal tasks took over and I pushed the incident to the back of my mind. Around 8 p.m., I got a notice my register needed more cash. I called Marlin over the intercom. She came up, we talked about what bills I needed, and I told the other cashier to handle returns and start closing tasks in the next aisle. She disappeared into aisle 2. Right then, a tall man walked in, maybe 61, about 200 pounds. He wore a black mask, a red hoodie with a beanie and ripped jeans. He held something behind his back. I've never been easily intimidated. I'm fairly strong and I'd grown up around tough people, but the look in his eyes made my blood run cold. They were bloodshot, unfocused, and locked on me. Given what had happened earlier with the bag that looked like a drug kit, it wasn't hard to imagine this guy was connected to that family, or at least on something. I tried to break the tension. "Hey man, what do you need?" He tilted his head in a slow, unnerving way and said something I'll never forget. "Are you the only one here with long hair?" I froze. "Excuse me," I said. He repeated it. "Are you the only one here with long hair?" I told him. "No, I'm not the only one." "Why does it matter?" Instead of answering, he jerked his chin toward the door and started calling me outside, layering on insults and slurs. My nerves spiked. I was the only person at the front. We were understaffed. He clearly wanted me alone. Everything in me screamed that if I stepped outside, I might not come back. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, voice shaking despite my effort to sound confident. Just then, Marlin came back to the front, joking about how I was always making her run. I quickly pointed at the man. "This guy's causing trouble," I said. Her expression changed in an instant. "What do you want from him?" she asked the man. He repeated his threats, demanded I step outside, and kept spitting out slurs. The tension felt like it would snap. Quietly, we signaled for help. One by one, the other managers appeared, some with box cutters in their hands. They didn't wave them around or anything, but they were ready. The man backed up a few steps toward the refrigerated cases at the front, still keeping one hand hidden behind his back. Then, out of nowhere, he grabbed a steak from the cooler and bolted for the door. Sam, the other long-haired manager, took off after him with 2 others. It felt like the guy was deliberately targeting people who looked like us, maybe confusing us with whoever had stopped his family earlier. I grabbed the intercom. All remaining staff to the front. Now, lock the doors. We shut the doors while a few customers, wide-eyed, waited inside. I tried to calm them. Attention shoppers, please remain away from the front doors. The incident is outside. You're safe inside the store. A couple of minutes later, the managers came back. They said the man might have had a gun, but once he realized he was outnumbered, he ran. We called 911. The operator refused to send anyone. Instead, they scolded us for chasing shoplifters. I understood their point. Running after thieves is dangerous, but I was furious. This wasn't just some stolen steak. I'd been threatened. I genuinely thought I might be killed. After that call, my anger mixed with fear. It felt like nobody cared what happened to us. I shut down my register early and asked to go home. They didn't argue. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind ran through every way it could have ended worse. If I'd gone outside, if we hadn't been able to signal the others in time, if he really had a gun and decided to use it. As if on cue, I came down with a brutal summer flu that night. I ended up spending a week at my aunt's place in the next town, recovering physically and mentally before going back to work. Nothing else happened after that. The man never came back. But I still think about those kids, their mother stuffing that bag, the way that man looked at me. I hope Child Protective Services found them and gave them a way out. If I learned anything, it's this. When your instincts tell you you're in danger, listen. Get out. My street smarts and my refusal to walk outside with that man might have saved my life. Around 2014 or 2015, when I was 13, I remember hiding from my father one evening. I don't remember what we'd argued about, only that I felt nervous and wanted to be alone. The guest room seemed like the best place. Nobody used it. It was always cold, dim, and quiet. I slipped inside and shut the door. A chill rolled over my arms. The air felt thicker in there than in the rest of the house. I turned on the small lamp. It barely lit the room, throwing more shadows than light. A couch sat pressed against the far wall. My legs were tired, so I lay down and stared at the ceiling. I have a bad habit of scaring myself on purpose, thinking about creepy things when I'm alone. That night was no different. My mind drifted to horror stories, monsters, and ghosts. Then I pictured a face. It came to me suddenly, a pale, warped face with wide, empty eyes and a twisted mouth. It was so vivid that my heart lurched. I sat up, scanning the room. Nothing. Just the faint flicker of the lamp, the couch, and the familiar furniture. I closed my eyes and tried to shake the image away. After a few minutes, the fear ebbed. I lay back down, though my muscles were tight, ready to spring back up. The lamp flickered again. I tensed. I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway, light, almost like a child's, not the heavier steps of my father. Then silence. I told myself I was imagining things, but the quiet felt too thick, like the room itself was listening. I tried to settle, pulling my jacket tighter around myself as the air grew colder. I told myself I just needed to stay there until my father calmed down and then I could go back to my bedroom. That's when it happened. I felt a warm hand holding mine. At first I assumed it was my other hand resting on top, but when I moved my fingers, the pressure didn't move with them. The warmth stayed, solid and distinct. It felt like someone else's hand. My whole body went rigid. My breath caught in my throat. I yanked my hand back in pure panic and shot off the couch so fast I almost tripped. My knees shook so badly they nearly gave out. I scanned the room, heart pounding. Nothing. Just the dim outlines of furniture and that flickering light. But my skin crawled. The sensation of that warm grip wouldn't leave my mind. I backed against the wall, staring at the couch, half expecting something to appear. The lamp flickered again and I gasped. I knew I had to get out. My feet felt like they weighed 100 pounds, but I forced them to move. I rushed to the door, fumbling with the knob, my fingers clumsy and weak. After what felt like forever, it turned. I bolted into the hallway and ran, not caring how loud I was, not looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the bright living room. I thought about going upstairs to my bedroom, but the stairwell was dark and I couldn't face another shadowy space. I stayed downstairs where every light was on. My father was nowhere to be seen. Normally, that would have made me feel more relaxed. Instead, I felt bizarrely alone, like I was the only person awake in the house. I sat on the living room couch, hugging a pillow to my chest. My mind replayed the moment on the guest room couch, over and over, the warmth of the hand, the squeeze around my fingers. I tried to tell myself it was just the way the cushion shifted, or that I'd scared myself so badly my brain had tricked my body. But the memory wouldn't fade. My whole body stayed tense, and every time I thought about it, a shiver rippled through me. Eventually, I forced myself upstairs. I ran, flipping on every light along the way. When I got to my room, I locked the door and sat on my bed, breathing hard. My room looked normal, but that didn't help. I couldn't stop seeing that pale, twisted face I'd imagined, and now it felt like that face belonged to whatever had touched me. I barely slept. Every creak sounded like footsteps on the stairs. Every whisper of air under my door sounded like breathing. I tried calling a friend, but it was late and nobody picked up. So I sat against my wall, lights blazing, waiting for the sun. I'm 23 now, and that night still scares me when I think about it. I avoid dark rooms, and if I have to be in one, I leave a light on. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe it was just nerves and a flickering lamp. But I know how real that warm hand felt. I never told my father what happened, and I've never gone back into that guest room. It started out as such a normal day. I had a morning appointment near my old childhood neighborhood, then a few quick errands. By afternoon, I was driving slowly along side streets I'd known my whole life. The sun was high, the roads nearly empty. I've always liked those narrow streets lined with big trees and aging houses, even though some drivers treat them like a racetrack. I was careful, keeping to the limit. As I passed the little corner store I used to walk to as a kid, I glanced in my rearview mirror. A car was so close behind me it looked like it was glued to my bumper. A surge of irritation rose up. I held my speed, hoping they'd back off. They didn't. They stayed right there, tailgating so closely it felt intentional. Something about that closeness made my scalp prickle, but I told myself it was just an aggressive driver. At the next straight stretch, I risked another look. The driver was an older woman with grayish silver hair and a deeply lined face. Nothing unusual there. She could have been anybody's grandmother. Then she bared her teeth. They were long, too long. Thin and sharp like something you'd see in a nightmare. My breath caught. I snapped my eyes back to the road. The street was silent. No pedestrians, no other cars. Just me, her, and those teeth. At the next stop sign, I slowed. She rolled to a stop too, still so close I couldn't see her front bumper. No space. No escape. My skin tingled as if electricity ran over it. I inched forward, expecting her to turn off at some point. She didn't. Street after street she followed, never changing distance, never passing. When I reached the turn I needed to take toward my old house, I signaled and turned. For a moment I lost sight of her. Then I heard tires squeal. In my mirror, I saw her car jerk forward onto the main road, speeding off in the opposite direction. My heart hammered, but I kept driving. I tried to tell myself she just had weird dentures and a bad attitude. Maybe I'd missing, or adrenaline had distorted things. I pulled up near my old childhood home. My parents had moved away years ago, but I liked to drive by once in a while. The place was run down now, peeling paint, boarded up windows, but it still felt familiar. I parked and stepped out for some air, leaning against my car and taking in the old house. Behind me, I heard the soft growl of an engine. I turned. Her car crept past, slow as a funeral procession. As she rolled by, she turned her head and locked eyes with me. Then she smiled. Her lips pulled back to reveal those long, unnatural teeth, longer than I'd thought. Too narrow, too sharp, sticking out at odd angles. My entire body went cold. She drove on, her eyes never leaving mine until she had to face forward. I scrambled back into my car and decided to leave the neighborhood and head home. As I turned toward the main road, I saw her car again, parked in front of a tiny convenience store on the corner. The driver's seat was empty. Against my better judgment, I pulled over across the street. I told myself I needed proof she was just normal, that I was overreacting. A minute later, she came out of the store. From a distance, she looked completely ordinary, small, hunched slightly, carrying a plastic bag. Then she saw me. She stopped. Her mouth curled slowly upward. Even from across the street, I could see her teeth, gleaming too white and too long in the daylight. That was enough for me. I started my engine and drove away, careful not to look back. I merged onto the road leading to the main avenue, trying to shake it off. Maybe she had some dental deformity. Maybe she liked scaring people. Maybe I was losing my mind. As I approached a traffic light, I glanced at my fuel gauge and swore under my breath. I was nearly out of gas. I couldn't risk the highway like that, so I pulled into a local gas station. The normalcy there was almost soothing. People filling their cars, a kid buying a soda, someone washing their windshield. I kept scanning the area, half expecting that dull-colored car to pull in. While I pumped gas, I caught a glimpse of movement in the station's glass storefront. In the reflection, across the street, she stood on the sidewalk, staring in my direction. She was too far away to see clearly, but I recognized her posture, that stiff tilt of her head. I didn't look directly at her. I put the nozzle back, skipped my receipt, and got in the car. I drove home with white-knuckled focus, checking my mirrors so often my eyes hurt. But she never appeared behind me again. Once I got home, I locked the door and turned on all the lights, even though it was still daytime. I tried to tell myself, she was just a strange old woman with weird teeth and a mean streak. But sometimes, late at night, I see those teeth again in my mind and wonder if I saw something, not quite human, wearing an ordinary woman like a mask. In 2022, I applied for a remote proofreading job I found on LinkedIn. It was supposedly with a well-known company, or so I thought. A man named Alex emailed me to set up an interview. We used Skype, but I never saw his face. It was just text-based questions. After that, I had a second interview with someone named Marlon, which was really just another set of written questions. No video, no voice. That should have been my first red flag. Shortly after I submitted my answers, Marlon messaged me saying the review team had approved me and I was hired. He sent over a 1099 form that only asked for my name and address, plus a contract to sign. Then he told me they'd mail me a check. I was supposed to deposit it into my account, then use the money to purchase a workstation from their approved vendor and pay that vendor directly. A check for $3,000 arrived. When I deposited it, my bank immediately showed the funds as available in my checking account. I assumed that meant the money had cleared. I relied on the bank system. If it showed as available, I thought it was safe to use. The vendor, who went by Kim, texted me instructions. She said I should send payments in increments until the workstation was fully paid for. At her direction, I sent 2 Zelle transfers of $500 each to one person, and then a $1,000 payment via Venmo to another person. I didn't know either of them. I know how it sounds. How could I have been that naive? I was fully aware the $3,000 wasn't my money. I thought I was simply passing it along. In my mind, I still had my original funds sitting in my account, and this new money was just flowing in and out for the company. If I'd known the check hadn't actually cleared, I never would have made any transfers. All of this took place over Labor Day weekend in 2022. The day after Labor Day, my bank called. The check was fraudulent. They'd placed a hold, and my account was now deeply negative from the transfers. They warned me not to contact any of the people involved and told me to file a police report. I did that same day. Alex emailed again and Kim texted, both asking where the rest of the money was and when the workstation would be shipped to my home. I ignored them. I saved every email, text, and screenshot and filed reports with multiple agencies. I was already working full-time and had just been trying to earn a little extra money during a rough time, especially while COVID was still affecting everything. I'd been so desperate for good news that I took getting hired on my late grandmother's birthday as a sign things were turning around. Instead, it was the start of a nightmare. We're a one-income household. My wife is disabled and in the long, slow process of applying for federal benefits. Losing that money hit us hard. The whole mess left me feeling like I'd failed my family. The stress crushed me. I eventually had to call 988 because the situation had become that overwhelming. I took time off from my real job to stabilize my mental health. I already had anxiety and depression, but this pushed both into worse territory. The agencies I reported to either never contacted me again or said there wasn't much they could do. When I followed up with the police, they told me they couldn't pursue it further and suggested I reach out to the Attorney General's office, which I already had. The officer mentioned it might have been an overseas operation and implied it likely wouldn't go anywhere. My bank told me that because the Zelle and Venmo payments had been authorized by me, my disputes were denied. They pointed to Regulation E, which doesn't protect against scams when the account holder themselves authorizes the payments. So I was out $2,000. As far as I know, the Skype, Venmo, and Zelle accounts used in the scam are all still active. I have no idea what, if any, steps the police took or whether the case just got shelved. I understand I hit send on those payments. I understand they weren't technically unauthorized. But the bank's app showed the funds as available, which felt misleading. If it had clearly shown the money as pending or on hold, I never would have moved a cent until I knew the check was legitimate. I've paid a heavy price for trusting that system and for letting my guard down. Since then, I've become extremely cautious with any online job offers. I dig deeper, cross-check companies, verify everything before giving out the smallest detail. I was eventually able to find a real, stable part-time job and start getting my life back in order. But I'd be lying if I said this doesn't still haunt me. I'd never had money stolen from me like that before. I've heard every version of how could you be so stupid. Since this happened, and trust me, I've asked myself the same question more than anyone else ever could. I'm sharing this because I don't want anyone else to fall for the same kind of trap. When you're struggling, a good opportunity can feel like a lifeline, but sometimes it's the hand that pulls you under.